So, welcome to Coexistent. My name is Ray Warren, and I am the founder of Coexistent. Today, I'm going to be interviewing Christopher Riggs. He's a fourth grade public school teacher, and he was a solo guitarist. Thank you so much for joining me today, Christopher.
Well, thank you for having me.
That's amazing. So, we actually met on the Autistic Music Network. I'm kind of curious, how did you stumble upon that?
I just went into the search bar in Facebook and I searched autistic musician, and then that's one of them that popped up.
Right. I think that's what I did too.
Right.
I was looking for all the different resources and like networks to meet with other people within the community. So going back a little bit, do you mind telling us about your diagnosis and how you were diagnosed, or like what made your parents diagnose you, or if you diagnosed yourself, or
Sure. So I tend to kind of talk a lot. So if at any point you want to interrupt me, please feel free. I tend to go on. But I wasn't diagnosed until I was an adult. So
okay.
I'm 36 now. I guess I got I'll be 36, I guess, in less than a month. But I was diagnosed in my 30s. When I have two daughters. One of them is 13 now. She's the oldest. And when she was in fourth grade, well, actually, I guess third grade, my wife started to research some things. We had some concerns about some difficulties she was having in school, and she started to think, I think she might be autistic. And we ended up finding out that she received a diagnosis, and through that process of learning about it, I started to realize that it described me really, really accurately. So it was a while before I had the opportunity to seek out a diagnosis and have the insurance and everything that allowed that. But when I finally was diagnosed a few years after, it was just such a relief. It really felt like it just explained so much about difficulties I had as a child, and the way that I relate to other people. And it's funny because now it was just a few days ago, a friend of mine who lives in Chicago had contacted me and said, "Oh, I didn't know you were autistic. I am too." And I thought, "Oh, that makes sense." Other people that I get along with that are sort of have the same disposition as me. So it was later in life that I had my diagnosis. But the first time I started thinking about it was in college. So I might have been 22 or 21 something, and I was listening to the radio, and there was some talk radio thing. I don't know if it was like This American Life or some NPR thing, but they were interviewing this man who was diagnosed later in life, and he starts kind of describing these like idiosyncrasies that he has about himself. And I remember being alone and listening to this. I think I was driving and being really scared. Like I thought, like, oh, this is me. He's describing me. I thought about that throughout the years, and I think because it frightened me so much, when my wife initially started to look into my the diagnosis for my oldest daughter, I pushed back a bit, and I was like, no, it can't be that. And I didn't want to admit it, didn't want to think about it. But there's just been so many moments since having to kind of face up to that have been really really revealing. And I feel like I continually have them as I like read something written by an autistic person or meet someone new. And yeah,
I think it's actually, your story is very, very interesting, because not only are you yourself, but your daughter is as well. So you're kind of like on the same side of like nurturing somebody who's autistic and also understanding yourself. So like, if you don't mind, I would love to come ask you questions from the parent side of autism, because I realize, like, if you don't mind asking, does your daughter STEM as well?
Oh yeah, the whole family does. Yeah. Yeah.
I always have these conversations with people, because, for me, I never got diagnosed. And it's crazy because I never considered myself anything until I met somebody, and they were like, do you know you have ADHD? And I'm like, no, I don't know what that means. Like, I don't understand, and like talking to my mom about it now, you know, she's telling me all these different things. But so one time I actually, because I used to work in ABA, and I know everyone is like, I want everyone to know, like, that's how I learned about myself was through ABA, because I was working with other children, and I saw a lot of what they did is what I did. And so I was able to relate to them a lot. And so it was always a very interesting process to see like the difference between how the parent views it and how like somebody who deals with it and somebody who has never dealt with it and they see it. Like different dynamic for sure. So for stimming with your daughter, how do you tell other people, or do you educate other people about it, or how does that happen?
Well, that's been a sort of a recent thing. I've started to be more open about telling people, coworkers, and sort of more open online, you know, like joining that Facebook group and that kind of thing. And so I'm pretty new to that, and I don't really. I mean, it's funny because like now with the with the COVID-19 stuff, that's the only way I'm interacting with people is through the internet. So, yeah, I haven't had the opportunity yet to really kind of explain that to people in person, but I've sort of geared myself up. I mean, I've had a lot of kind of rehearsed conversations in my head, and you know how I wish I would have done things differently as far as advocating for her. Yeah, so that's very new to me. Just because I've sort of recently, I guess, like come out of the closet, as it were, with my own. But yeah, so it's a bit new to me.
No, you know, and this is why I kind of wanted to have this podcast, because like I find that there are many, many people who see neurodiversity, but they only see like certain variations of it. They don't see the whole variation of it. They don't see the whole picture of it. And so a lot of people are not open about being like, there are a lot of people who are secretly neurodiverse, and like I'll talk to them, and that's fine. But I wanted to show people like there's alterations to your life. Like you could have a great life and still, well, you could have a great life in your own terms and still have be neurodiverse. Especially with people who are ADHD. When I was researching it, it was really hard for me to find somebody who was actively ADHD and was like in the science community. Like it didn't really, it was because it's so focused, like you need to be focused. But going back to it, so your daughter, you found out your daughter was autistic. Do you call her autistic, or do you say neurodiverse?
We say autistic in the house.
Autistic. Do you say you're autistic, or do you say you're a neurodiverse?
I say autistic.
Okay. What else? So then I'm kind of curious, like, what are some of the like pattern or some of the similarities that you and your daughter share?
Oof, yeah. So I guess I should preface this by saying that I have two daughters. One is quite young, one is 2 years old. But the one we're speaking about, I actually adopted her, so she's not biologically related to me. But there are a lot of similarities. You know, sensory issues. So this isn't as much of an issue as it used to be because of where we now live. But we used to live. So we live on the south side of Chicago. I guess we always have. But we used to live closer to downtown, and it was a more kind of densely populated area. And 4th of July in Chicago is even just the month of July, and the weeks leading up to it are just people kind of setting off fireworks all the time. And it got to the point where we would have to leave the city and go somewhere else, especially for the night of the 4th of July, just to be away from those sounds. So that's something that her and I share quite a bit. You know, and we both like to block out sounds, whether it's through you know, wearing you know, those big ear muff things that they have at gun ranges. We have 1 or 2 of those sets of those in the house. And are kind of easily distractible kind of dispositions where, you know, if we're attempting to do work and there's anything else going on, it becomes impossible to focus on the details of that work. It's weird. I mean, mostly, this might not be a very, very helpful characteristic. Although I guess as soon as I say this, my wife and my oldest daughter are going to be like, "No, that's you, not us." but we're just kind of all strange. We're a bit odd for the family in general, and I do kind of lead the charge on that a bit, and. Yeah, I mean, aversion to eye contact, not understanding social cues, wanting to talk about special interests is definitely a thing that her and I both do. I mean, we both launch into monologues all the time, and to the point where we've had to really, at the dinner table, since my other daughter is 2 years old, she gets really upset, the 2-year-old, if one of us launches into a monologue, mostly because, we're not talking to her or about something she's interested in. So she will get very upset. So we really try to control it, but both of us have this just incredibly strong urge to just info dump, just like, I want to tell you about this thing that only I'm interested in. That's one that's going on, currently.
Do you guys also have, like, I know for me personally, like, I pattern recognize really, really quickly. Do you seem to have that as well? Pattern recognition,
I don't
like
know.
really fast.
Um, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. I'd have to think about that more. I'm not sure, and I'd have to ask my daughter. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't thought about that.
It's always interesting because I know, like, with like there are a lot of stereotypes within, the community, and I know has a unique perspective to the stereotypes. And so, like, info dumping, for example, like, if you're on my Facebook, you'll see like paragraphs and paragraphs of something I just learned. And so I didn't know that was like, it wasn't until I met more people in the community, and I'm like, oh, okay, cool. It's not just me, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And it makes you feel a lot better because you're around people who just get it. And
Yeah.
so, like, why did you join the Autistic Music Network versus just a regular music network? I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah. I think being kind of an odd kid, being nerdy and weird, and not having a lot of friends, and throughout my adolescence and young adulthood, trying to find little communities that were like I would feel like I belonged,
Hmm.
um, and those took lots of different forms. I kind of tried out a bunch of things, and none of them really totally fit. Whether it was like hardcore punk or metal or various music communities or that kind of thing. But I thought, well, hey, maybe I've found my people now. Like maybe autistic people can be the one. And there's some truth to it. I think. So I met Robin, who
Yeah.
plays as Robin plays chords, and in another group that I always forget the name of, which is a duo. And I know the other person in the duo is Amber Bird. I always forget the name of the duo, but I met him, and then I met some other autistic musicians through that group, and just through Googling, and I put together this Autistic Pride concert that was done live streamed, because this was as the COVID-19 stuff was going on. This was June 18th on Autistic Pride Day, and
Oh.
when some of these people approached me once this was advertised that this was happening, and some of the people I sought out because I knew who they were. One of them was a musician in Chicago who I had met and played with before, and I knew that he was autistic as well. But one thing I noticed is how easy some of the email communications were setting this up. Like, I remember telling my wife, when they asked me questions, they did it all in bullet point
Yeah.
format. It was like very direct, very, very clear what they're asking. And actually, your communication with me was similar. You were really to the point in what you were asking. And I've noticed that, I mean, I can't, this is like 6 people or 7 people or whatever it was. I'd be like, well, all autistic people ask questions in bullet point form, but it has been a difficulty for me and for my daughter when we see directions, especially from teachers. And I'm a teacher, so colleagues will do this, where they're in sort of, very florid paragraph form, like they're giving you this rich description of a direction and it doesn't really make any sense. And all I can think is like, I just wish you would just give me the steps, and then I would know what you want from me, and then I could do it.
I think that's actually really cool. Because I think for me, like I'm always in a rush. I don't know, just naturally. So I feel like everyone else is in a rush, and so I never really thought about that, because now that I think about it, like, yeah, I just want to get to the point, and I know a lot of people want like the extra. I never really thought about that.
Yeah.
It's crazy because like when I write like these long, obnoxious paragraphs, and it's just like now I'm getting to a point where like I don't want any of those. I just want like the very concise form, and so I think that's really, really cool. And I think because I actually Robin's actually my second guest on my podcast.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and then we had like this long, like I love talking to him because he just can give you so much information. Like, I think what I love about it is that everyone who has their special interest, like you can go as deep as you want with them, and like they know, and it's just so amazing. Like I don't know, maybe it's just me and I like geek out on things like that. And I think that's why I wanted to come into the community, because I know asking somebody about their special interest, you will get so much information. It's amazing. So going back to, you said that you were a solo guitarist. Can you tell us about your music journey?
Sure. I guess when I was 10 years old, my parents got me a guitar. My brother played guitar. I have an older brother, and so I wanted to play. I wanted to be like him. And at first, I had taken a few lessons, and I didn't really take to it. I didn't really have, sort of at that point in my childhood, around the age of like 10 years old, it felt like a lot of my peers were developing an identity, usually through like some kind of extracurricular activity. I didn't really have any. And I was starting to approach adolescence and like having more difficulty with friendships and that kind of thing. But so at first with the guitar, I just kind of wanted to make weird noises with it. I would detune it all the way, so I'd make the strings really loose. I'd kind of rub the strings, just kind of. I made all these little recordings on this like Fisher Price tape recorder that I had. I don't know where it is now, but probably gone. But and then I kind of set it aside, and it wasn't until my parents had taken me to see a classical guitarist. I didn't know what that was at the time. And I was like blown away by the virtuosity of it, that there was polyphony, that, he could play a bass line at the same time he was playing a melody, and he could kind of make it seem like he was playing chords at the same time as a melody. And, it sounded like a piano or something, or it sounded like two guitars. So I wanted to learn. So my mother had a classical guitar, and we had a teacher who was this really nice guy who still teaches, named Mark Mashaud. And I started taking lessons with him. I progressed pretty quickly and really had a knack for it. And
wait,
go ahead.
Can I ask you? Because I don't know, because for me, like, I'm obsessed with music, right? Can you see your musical notes? Like, because you said you had an act for it. Like, can you explain like what that means, or go in more detail?
Yeah. So it's some of it has to do with like kind of. It took me a long time to try to figure that out, especially as it relates to the diagnosis and everything. So classical guitar is played without a pick. It's played with the fingers of the right hand and the thumb, the right hand plucking the notes. So you can, do arpeggios and polyphony, with the bass and the fingers. And it for the classical guitar, it's really important the way that you shape your nails. Like you have to grow the nails out on your right hand slightly and shape them in specific ways. So when I was still playing that kind of thing, I would have like a little kit that I have to keep with me with a nail file and
That's so
emery
cool.
an emery board, right? And this really fine grit sandpaper to smooth it out. And one thing that I've never really been, I've gotten better over the years, but I was never really somebody who was good at recognizing pitch. I wasn't somebody who could, you play me a melody and then I could play it back. Now with training, I'm able to do that. But at the time, it was sort of like, why would I want to do that? It didn't really interest me at all. But what really interested me was the physical and like technical aspect of it. So if given the opportunity, I'd sit there and I'd play scales and arpeggios and the kinds of things that are meant to just prepare you to play pieces. That's all I really wanted to do. And I would obsess over the little tiny inconsistencies of the sound. I like, oh, there's a tiny little bit of my nail that's not smooth. I need to fix that. That kind of thing. And it got to the point where I had very, very good technique and I had really, really good tone, because that's what I was concerned with. And I mean, it was when I was a teenager, I would have to, it was never perfect enough. Like the tone would never quite be pure enough for me. So I remember I would turn on a fan, like a portable fan. I crank it up to like the third setting and have it in the room with me, and it would like filter out whatever the frequencies that had those like inconsistent sounds in them that I didn't like.
Yeah.
And it allowed me to practice. But then when I had to like play without it, I remember having to go to a lesson and thinking like, well, I don't have the fan on right now. I can hear these other things, even though my teacher probably wasn't paying attention to those kinds of things. So that really,
But
at the same time. Oh, go ahead.
I don't know. I just want to ask, like, because of I, because I definitely relate to the obsessive tendencies where you could pick up the subtleties in certain things that most people miss. And so
Yeah.
my thing is, how did you discover the fingernail thing? Because I've listened to a lot of people talk about guitar, but nobody has talked about the fingernail.
Oh, I mean,
That's so interesting.
I
That's
mean, I
actually
didn't.
cool.
I shouldn't take credit for. I mean, like the guitarists do worry about that. My teacher would tell me like, "Oh, you got to fix that fingernail." It wasn't like it was just me, but I would sort of hone in on it
Mm,
more than the people around me. And to the point where I mean, the short version of the story is I got a scholarship to study at the Overland Conservatory of Music, and I studied classical guitar there until I became really disillusioned with it and changed majors to composition, this kind of mixed major that I had there. But even while I was there, while I was
mhm.
studying, I had so few pieces in my repertoire, because so much of the 7-8 hours a day that I would practice, so much of it was dedicated to exercises,
Mm.
and it just didn't. The idea of learning some piece of music really didn't, especially the kind of music that is written for that instrument, just really didn't interest me at all.
Yeah.
Um,
That's so interesting. So you legitimately were obsessed with the guitar for the frequency sounds instead of the music, right? Is that what you're saying? Like the sounds that
yeah,
it would
I mean,
make?
yeah.
That's so cool. Now I'm actually really interested. You said you had a scholarship to what school was it called?
Oberlin Conservatory. It's in Ohio.
Oh, is it for like college or is it for
Yeah, I believe it's the only liberal arts college that has a music conservatory attached to it in the United States. So it's Oberlin College, but Oberlin Conservatory of Music at Oberlin College.
Wow. Okay, so you went to because from what you told me, you're a fourth grade public school teacher. So now I'm curious, like, why did you go to music school and then became a teacher? Like, how did that?
Well, I needed a job. I think that was the main reason that I did it. I mean, I do love teaching, but uh, I mean, I guess this gets into the high unemployment rates for autistic people, and how difficult even people that you know might mask very well and might not seem to have difficulties. They often do have difficulties maintaining employment. So once I graduated, there was no real clear path
Hmm.
to finding employment. And so I worked as a music teacher, a private music teacher. I didn't make a lot of money doing that, and it's hard to. You're an independent contractor. You don't have health care. So for most of that time, I was living with my parents, and then I went to grad school for music again, thinking, well, it was a program that offered me money. So I thought, well, that'll give me 2 years where I don't have to figure out the job thing. And I thought, maybe it would lead to me becoming an academic and I could get into a PhD program, but that proved to be similar difficulty to finding a job. And before I met my wife, I had come back to the Chicago area after grad school, and I was just kind of trying to figure out what I could do for a job that would allow me to have some kind of an adult existence, and started thinking about teaching and revisiting teaching music lessons, thinking I do really like working with kids. So actually with my wife's help, found a program that allowed me to get a teaching license, I think in a year and a half or 2 years. And then I got I worked in a Catholic school for a year, but then got hired by Chicago Public Schools, and I've been with them. Now I just completed my 4th year with them, so it'll be my 5th year in the fall.
This is relatively very interesting to me. First, let's go a little bit back to masking. I just finished writing an article about masking, and for Neuroclassic, because I don't think people really understand that when you are neurodiverse or when you are autistic or whatever, you actually can't you copy someone else's personality because it's just harder for you. And I've read that 85% of people with autism are unemployed with a PhD, and that's something that it's, especially if you have the diagnosis, because there's such this stigma that around autism, because a lot of people this is a trigger warning, and I add this trigger warning. In the United States, Asperger's and autism are the same thing, but in other countries, they're not. So there's a stigma around autism. There's a stigma around ableism. There's all these type of stigmas. So I'm kind of curious, you couldn't find it, because a lot of people do not know this, but most neurodiverse people are entrepreneurs for this reason. They're entrepreneurs because they can't find a job. So why didn't you become an entrepreneur, or why did you want a job instead?
Yeah, I mean, I thought about that. I still occasionally will think like, oh, wouldn't that be great if I could just kind of turn. It seems like some of the autistic people or neurodiverse people who become entrepreneurs, they turn their special interest into a thing that allows them to, make a living, and that makes sense. And it's often been difficult for me to do that with my special interests. So I think that's been a big part of it.
So do you think it's just were you not able to monetize it? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I'd say that. Yeah.
Okay. That okay, because I know that was actually one of the conversations that I'm having with different communities about how can we get this to monetization, and that'll be interesting. And then, so if you were able to monetize it, you probably would have been an entrepreneur. Do you not? Sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Do you not like playing live shows, or?
No, I do. I mean, I do and I don't. It depends. I mean, they do produce a lot of anxiety. Mostly, it's not so much the performing; it's the sort of all the interactions that you have to have before and after. That. I mean, I give one example of this. I had booked this. I guess this would have been about a year ago. I booked a performance, and it was with a group. Actually, one of the other members was an autistic musician in Chicago named Charles Joseph Smith. It was a large group, and the person booking it, I contacted him and I said, hey, when do you think start time will be? Because I knew when doors were, I knew we could load in for a sound check or whatever. And then he responded and he said, gig o'clock. I think that meant like, well, whenever you feel like playing or whatever. And it was a nice, very very like little snapshot of what I don't like about doing shows, that it isn't clear, especially because I play, because of the type of music that I play, I'm in kind of DIY spaces that are, unofficial kinds of venues. So you're less likely to have a strict schedule on when things are going to start, and there's not a stage. You're playing on the floor in front of people, and then you have to like set up and then talk to people, and I don't like doing that, no.
I think it's so hilarious that you're talking, like, because for me, like, I've always struggled with verbal skills. I could write, but verbal skills have always been my struggle. And I'm actually, next week, I'm going to be going and like actually developing my verbal skills. So I completely understand you when it talks about like doing social things. I actually joined an organization to work on my social anxiety for that reason. Going back though, I think one of the reasons why I'm obsessive with the autistic community is because with like when you have what a lot of people don't understand is when you have pattern recognition, everything looks the same. So you get bored very, very quickly. And it's not until you meet somebody who's autistic that can show you some kind of subtleties, or they'll show you something brand new, right? Because I was I was talking to Robin, and he was telling me that his type of music is also DIY, and I was like, thank you for making my world interesting. So I also want to tell you, thank you for making my world interesting. Because I stopped listening to the radio because they started just playing music that had already shown data that would be popular, and they just varied it. And so it got boring. So now I'm like looking for music in other countries to kind of get out of that.
Okay.
So it's very exciting. So my next question is what were some of the struggles you went through that you kind of overcame, through your whole music journey or during becoming a teacher, actually? Because I've dropped out of school twice now. How did you was school easy for you?
No, so high school and middle school were difficult, especially with like bullying and things like that. Maintaining healthy relationships with peers and being able to kind of be accepted by them. That was really, really difficult for me. It was easier in college. It was still, there were a lot of weirdos. It was a liberal arts school, so there were a lot of weird kids there. So it was easier for me, but it wasn't. It was still difficult. But becoming a teacher, yeah, it's easier, I think, now. How much of this can I say? Let's see. Kind of thinking if I can.
How about I rephrase the question? Like I'll because I know a lot of people right now, like some of my friends who don't have a career because they have no kind of path, because getting through just studying and not feeling so lost in their studies, or getting through, like for me, like I struggle with social anxiety. So in class, well, actually I have natural really bad anxiety. So in class, if my teacher is not actively engaged with me, I'm done. Like I'm zoned out. And then when I hear sounds from peers, it really upsets me. So it's harder for me to sit in class because I'm very, very anxious, right? Which is crazy because I only need like 2 classes and I graduated. But but for other people that I've talked to, like they've just dropped out. And so I'm asking on what are some tips or techniques that you use to kind of deal with it? How about that?
Yeah, I mean, I know lots of people who fit into kind of what you described, and one of them was a very close friend of mine, my friend Chris, who I'm quite certain he was autistic. I can't, he fits into just such a strong archetype of what that is. But he took his own life, I think about 2 years ago that was. And he was an incredibly smart man. I went to college with him, and then he grew up not too far outside Chicago. But he really struggled with employment. He struggled with maintaining his happiness, feeling fulfilled in his life, and even though he was just this kind of brilliant guy in just so many different ways, I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment with regard to work, and it's something that I definitely got from my father, where I will kind of just, it doesn't matter how bad it is, I'll just kind of do it and just keep doing it, and that's been helpful for me because it's eventually it might not be seen as a positive thing at first by an employer, but if they start to notice after a year, like, oh wait, he's still here, then they start to appreciate you a bit. But the social part of it is so hard too, because I mean I've had so many experiences at jobs where I've just felt so othered, and to the point where it's just like I just want to crawl in a hole and just never have to go through this experience again. The other thing that's helped me is the thing is I tried to get Chris to do this too, my friend who's no longer alive, and he actually he was a teacher in Colorado earlier in his life, teaching in a school that had a lot of difficulties, very much a low resource school, and I've personally found that being in that kind of environment is really helpful. That I, for one thing, I feel more fulfilled by it. It feels like there's a need for me to be there, and I also think they're more forgiving of my idiosyncrasies. That the other aspect of it that's been helpful to me this year is I started a new school. This past year is my first year at the school, and still in CPS. Well, it's kind of easy to, once you're within a school district, at least the school district of Chicago Public Schools, it's kind of easy to move from school to school. You don't change employers. You just have a new position. And at the school I'm at, I'm one of the only white people there. It's almost entirely black. And on the third floor of the building where I am the only white person there. And even though that was very new for me, my high school was somewhat diverse, but to be a minority in that sense, just within the context of the school was a very new experience for me. But I felt so accepted by the school and by the students and by the staff and the parents and the families, and it also that I could kind of behave oddly in the way that I do, and nobody said anything. Nobody would comment on it. Whereas at other jobs, that very much was not the case. Where it felt really obvious when I would act strange, and things were said to me, and so I think for me, finding a place where one, I might be needed, and also, if you feel like an other, then how else can I other myself? How else can I take that experience? I take that experience that will allow me to then have more insight into how other people deal with things like oppression and any kind of institutional discrimination and things like that. And that if nothing else, if it allows me to have some kind of insight, then I think that would be fruitful.
It's so crazy that you talk about this, because it's like the same exact story for me. So I am very, very like I'm very strange, and so I try to be with people who just accept that, right? So like I currently work with I'm a caregiver for neurodiverse people,
Mm,
and I work in behavioral health. So I learn about like all these things and like psychology and behavioral health and behaviorisms, and people have always interested me, but I've been taught empathy. Like empathy is like one of those cultural things that my mom like instilled in me. Um, but I've been oftentimes where I can get promoted in jobs, but I'd feel weird because I couldn't be myself. And
mm,
when I work with the current job that I have, like people always asking, why don't you do more? And it's like, if I do more, I'll lose this sense of belonging, right? Because like my
yeah.
clients, they love me for, they just love me. Like I love them and we're just all together, they happy, right? Versus when you work a corporate job, there's so much politicalness and there's so much correctiveness. There's so much, like I ask a lot of questions. And I wanted something that will allow me to be as curious as I am. But at the same time, I didn't want like, I always get asked, why don't you go on, is it Ritalin? I think it's Ritalin or Adderall. I'm
Mm.
often asked that, why aren't you on medication? You know, uh, or yeah, people like literally ask me like, are you autistic? And I'm like, I don't know. I know ADHD, but because because I'm always in some kind of deep conversation. And so hearing your story talking about like that level of belongingness and that level of like finding people that accept you, because a lot of the people that I've interviewed so far, they've all said those same answers. So
Mm.
the common theme within this community of people, so that's very, very exciting. Uh, and for me, what helped me a lot, because I just want to add it to like the studying. Um, I'm a workaholic. And that's an understatement. I like to be doing something at all times.
Mm. Yeah, yeah.
And so I think that's just the hyperactivity of ADHD. Um, but I don't want to blame it there. So for me, if I got for me, what I've learned is to try to find classes that were smaller. So thank God I went to a college of small people. If I went to a big college, there's no way I'd survive. And then
Mm.
secondly, office hours with my teacher. Like I'm grateful that some of my teachers like kind of thought I was a genius. And I'm saying that very loosely, but they understood my crazy. And so like they would push me to do more. And that helped a lot. So
Mm.
taking this back to you and going back to employment and like the struggles of it, currently, what are you working on?
Um, that's a good question. I mean, at the moment, I'm just really scared to go back. So we start kind of late compared to other school districts, public school districts in the country. We start after Labor Day in Chicago, and they've right now the mayor has decided that we will go back in a kind of hybrid model that some districts are doing, where it's really, I mean, there's no point talking about the details because they're always shifting anyway. But it's it's scary, and it's partially scary because schools like mine are not really given the resources that they need, and they're going to be, more vulnerable, and I don't want to be getting sick. Obviously, nobody does. But so
Yeah.
I mean, that, at the moment, it's kind of just like circulating in my head and just kind of won't go away, and like ticking down the weeks until like hopefully they'll change their minds and do something different. But prior to that being announced, I recently started reading this guy Damian Milton.
Mm-hmm.
Um, he's a autistic sociologist in the UK.
His name?
Damian Milton is his
Okay.
name. Um, he had a similar kind of path to mine with his diagnosis. His son was diagnosed quite a bit younger than I think he was diagnosed at like the age of 2 or something, uh, and then he also sought out a diagnosis for himself when he kind of realized that these things were describing him, and then he found out that he was as well.
Mm-hmm.
And he since then he's written about autistic communities from the perspective of sociology and philosophy, and disability rights advocacy and that kind of thing. And I really like his writing. You know, I'm almost done with his book. I've actually, before we started speaking, I'm like 10 pages until the end of it or something like that. In one of the essays, I don't remember which one, he talks about employment and from his own perspective, and how, you know, he had a PhD and he still couldn't find a job. He still couldn't find, he was kind of so far removed from what a middle-class life would be. And this other, what's her name? She wrote Neurodiversity. She's Australian.
I cannot think of her name.
I'll think of it probably after we're done. But she also kind of talks about that, like that her, because she realizes that her mother and her daughter. So I think what happened is her daughter was diagnosed, and she realized that she also, I think where she is, it's Asperger's, but then she had Asperger's, and so did her mother. She kind of talks about, like, well, why? Like, I'm smart. My mother was smart. Why did we struggle so much financially? Why was this so difficult? So I mean, as far as like working on, I mean, mostly it's just like I sit around pontificating on things and just think, you know, like what are the implications of you know, a financial system that doesn't want to take care of people. I don't know. I mean, I could kind of go on and on about that kind of thing, but
it's so funny because, like, for me, one of the biggest thing that drives me hard is to get the skills needed to rebuild resources for the community. Because when you listen to people, like, it does not make sense that 85% of people who are educated cannot find jobs. That just doesn't make sense to me. And yet it's because slowly but surely jobs are being, like, taken away.
Yeah.
And at the same time, it's like for me, like, all I do is read about, like, people, entrepreneurs. That's all I do. So all I read about is business. My dad was into business. My family was big into business. So, you know, it's just like a hobby of mine. And so it was always these ideologies of how can we make this better. And I think with unemployed, like, I know I've asked people, like, well, why are you unemployed? Because I genuinely don't understand the problem enough, where it's like, you have the skill sets, you have the knowledge. Is it the experience? Like, what's going on there? And then you find out that most of it stops before it starts at the interview phase, because most people don't do eye contact, you know? Or a lot of them, like, I guess for me, my mom has studied psychology, and she worked in psychology. So as a little girl, I was taught psychology. I was taught emotional. Like, my mom would ask me, well, why do you think that person's thinking that? Or why do you think they're feeling that way? You know? And so I was taught very young a lot of psychological skills and emotional skills. But even myself, like, when I go to people that I don't know, I go voluntarily mute. I'm grateful that I'm very, very grateful for the interview skills that I did acquire. And I learned how to network with people, because I read, like, because for me, a little background on me is I moved to LA with no network, no nothing, and I could not get a job, and I needed a job. So I, like, looked through the back door.
Yeah, right.
And I volunteered a lot. I tried to get into the door any which way I could, and then I would just showcase my skills. And I was often always able to get a job that way. And then I was able to pick up on, like, little subtleties on what people would be thinking, or how their thought process would work. And then I would showcase what you could see. Because anyway, this is me info dumping. Let me go backwards. But I think that is something that needs to be addressed within, because I also find that there are people within the autistic community that don't want to work. And so it's always a very interesting, is not only the fact of interviewing problems, but it's the sensory problems, right? Like, I don't like being around big groups. And currently right now, like, at my job, we have group activities, and I find myself taking me and my client by ourselves, because I don't like to be in groups for long periods of time. And so there's a lot of, like, little things like that it's a little bit more different for the autistic or the neurodiverse individual. But when I was talking about things that you're working on, because you're a solo guitarist, do you like how do you do gigs, or how do you play your music, or how do you get your music out to people, or what drives your music?
Oh, sure. I play the electric guitar pretty much exclusively now, and most of what I do is what a lot of composers and musicians now call, or at least did at one point, extended techniques. So instead of what traditional techniques would be strumming the strings, plucking the strings, putting your fingers with your left hand to play note, etc. Whereas extended techniques would be like rubbing something along the string to make a sound, putting something in between the strings, and that's kind of what I exclusively do now. And I have a sort of a rich vocabulary that I've developed over the last 15 years or whatever I've been doing it. It's been longer than that, 17, something like that. And for a while, there's sort of little micro genres. One of them is noise music, and I sort of kind of fit into that genre. There's also free improv is another one that's kind of an extension of free jazz that I also kind of sort of fit into, and they do some of those things. But prior to getting the official diagnosis, I have a very specific way that I kind of put my music out there, and this gets into why it's difficult to monetize what I do once I start describing it. So since 2007, I've been recording what I do. So I think I started doing this kind of thing in around 2003. Sort of realized that, this thing that I do in the guitar, other people might do something like this too, and then I kind of kept doing it. In 2007, I started recording it and keeping very careful track of the time and date that each recording was made. And so the music was, for the most part, improvised in a sense. I mean, that could be a longer conversation about kind of how it's generated, but I'd record 2 minutes of music or whatever, and then at the time I was writing down. I was okay, well, that one was done at March 1st, whatever, and at this time of the day. I've now done that until today. I've continued doing that. So I have sort of these thousands of recordings that date back to 2008. They're all time and date stamped, and they kind of sound like special effects from a science fiction movie or a horror movie or something. They don't really sound much like a guitar. But I've come to realize, it's funny, when I told my wife this, but I finally had the revelation, I was like, oh, I think this is stimming that I've been doing all this time on the guitar. And she was like, yeah, like, what did you think it was? Like, what else could it be? I was like, oh, okay, yeah, because I mean, it's
I love that.
I'll sit there like with the amp. Usually I have my amp on a stand, and I'll often have my face right in front of it, and I'll find some sound that I like, and I'll just keep doing it, and I want to hear it, over and over again. And then I might say, okay, well, now I'll record it. So I'll record for 2 minutes of me doing it. But so much of it is just this kind of sensory gratification.
Yeah.
So I do play live. I'll play a couple times a year in Chicago. I've 10 years ago, in 2010, 2009, 2008, I would go on tour occasionally. I've played a little bit in the United States and Canada, and I played once in Europe. But yes, so much of it is now, especially during the pandemic stuff. I mean, I'm not seeking out performances. So I think, yeah.
I was, I don't know if you know this, but I'm trying to desperately put together like a music show or a contest or something for people to play and showcase. And, because to me, I love music. I'm obsessed with it. I don't play anything. I just listen to it. I'm a consumer. But I think music is a way of expression. It's a way for people it's like an outlet, like, with either poetry or what have you. But going backwards, like for your recordings, did you ever put them on YouTube, or did you put them on? Do you do social media other than what?
Yeah, I have. So I've got all my recordings up on Bandcamp, because I have some of them up on SoundCloud, but SoundCloud has a limit to how many you can post without a paid account. So Bandcamp doesn't. You can have unlimited space. So that I have everything on Bandcamp,
Oh,
and I can send you all those links to if you want to listen for anything related to.
yeah, I definitely because I want. Yeah. What about social media? Is it like for people to uh, follow you, or how do people figure out your updates, or if someone wants to hear your latest sound? Because to me, why I'm obsessed right now, well, what I'm obsessed with is like, well, first of all, I get bored really easily, so when I find something interesting, I just want to like absorb it.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so how do people get updated from you?
So I'm mostly through my website, and then there's links to I have like Twitter and Facebook and all the different social media things. So my website is ChristopherTRiggs.com. T is in
Mm-hmm.
Thomas. It's just my first and last name and middle initial. And I keep all my recordings on there. I have a mailing list that goes out once a month where I send usually a randomly selected recording from like my archive of recordings. I post stuff on Twitter occasionally that'll say, hey, check out this recording, or I'll announce when I am doing live stuff. Facebook, I probably use Facebook more frequently for that. So I do have a Facebook page that my website links to. I'm old, so Facebook makes more sense to me than Twitter, but
That's amazing. I will definitely leave the links to everything when I post this. And I'll probably send you like the final version of this before. But is there anything else you would like to add before we end this interview?
I guess the only thing I'd add, there's a musician that I really wanted to mention. I didn't mention them. They just didn't come up. But there's just so many interesting autistic musicians out there, and a lot of them seem to be kind of toiling away in obscurity. And they're not. Maybe they're not promoting themselves, or they don't really have those same kind of promotional skills. Or put another way, they're any way of promoting themselves doesn't fit into the social norms that would be accepted by neurotypical people. And one of them, in particular, is a musician in Wisconsin who performs under the name Be a Water Wolf.
Yeah, what?
And Be a Water Wolf.
Okay.
I can send you those the links for their stuff too. But they're incredible. They're one of my favorite musicians now. They're this multi-instrumentalist, and I think I don't know if they're self-taught or not, but it seems like they just can play anything, and they do these multi-tracked jazz and free jazz recordings where they're playing three of the instruments and just kind of layered on top, and I'm just blown away by all their stuff. They're also very hard to get a hold of. I've tried for months and I haven't been able to get in touch with them. And I've even contacted collaborators of theirs in attempts to, and they've said, yeah, I haven't heard from them in a year or whatever. So, but there's just so much cool stuff out there, and some of it is by autistic people. So yeah, that's the only thing I want to say.
And I was, because I'm part of this thing. Well, I'm part of another group that's aimed at trying to change the music industry as a whole. And like, because the industry doesn't really feed the musicians, as you say, like you had to have a job. And so we're looking at different ways. I'm actually part of I know somebody who's a musician, and he's helping musicians brand themselves. So, I'll probably be able to pass that along with you, because I'll probably pass that information along within the network and have him come and probably talk about some of the stuff, like about branding, which I probably need to edit this part out. I'm going to edit this part out. But yeah, sorry. I'm like thinking about this right now.
No worries. No worries.
But I'm really, really absolutely appreciative if you could send me all the links to your store, to the musicians, and if you could send me any information to anybody who would also be interested in a podcast. And then I also know people who have their own podcast. So, probably getting more people aware and getting more people into the community will be great. But thank you so much for your time. It was absolutely.
Well, thank you.
absolutely amazing. I hope you have a great night.
You too. Thank you so much.
You too. Bye.
Bye.